Welcome into the College Football Overtime podcast. My name is Garrett Chapman. His name is Abe Gordon. Got a lot to get into with the Week 4 reaction show. Lots of unbelievable games that transpired over the course of the weekend, including a thriller in the SEC, an upset in the SEC, and another thriller in the ACC. Lots of great games to go around. Ed Gordon, what do you say, man? Let's just jump right into it. But before we do that, how you doing?
I'm doing good, man. Once again, another Saturday that delivers. Maybe we learned a little something. Maybe we actually didn't. Very interested to break it all down with you.
Yeah, and week 5, by the way, the week 5 reaction show. I had a typo there. I didn't catch it before I just said it out loud. But you let's start in the SEC here because this was honestly a thriller of a football game that Bama led this game 28-0. They scored on all their first 4 drives. They led this game again 30-7. Then UGA outscores them 27-3 before they come right up to the end of this game, right up to the 2-minute warning. And then Jalen Milroe connects with Ryan Williams for this unbelievable pass down the right sideline, 75 yards. They hit the clincher, but then they get an interception. The 4th turnover of the game for Carson Beck. It was a game that was pretty much all but done. And Georgia played in desperation mode throughout the course of the second half, but they clawed and fought their way back into this game. Really just an impressive game from the University of Georgia just in this second half. If you ignore the first half, it was not so great in the first half. But then for the Alabama side, they looked unstoppable in that first half. It looks like the offense was clicking on all cylinders. They could throw the ball. They could run the ball. They were hitting the short to intermediate passing routes. They were hitting the deep routes. Everything was working for Alabama and Jalen Milroe and company. It looked like it was going to be a trouncing. It looked like the 42-game winning streak was going to come to an end in disaster fashion. It does end up coming to an end, but in a one-score game where Georgia had an opportunity to tie this game at the very end. Just a wild, wild football game over there in Tuscaloosa.
Well, look, you lead this game asking a couple of questions of both sides, and you start with Alabama. What changed offensively? Because you were unstoppable. You race out to a 28-0 lead. What happened? What changed? Did you pull back? Did you stop running Jalen Milroe? Because he did run for $117 and 2 touchdowns in this one. A lot of that damage was done early. So the question I have for Alabama is what happened? What changed to let Georgia back into this game? And the question I would have for Georgia is, did you see enough fight and comeback and maybe game-changing ability to believe that if you play Alabama again in the SEC title game or in the college football playoffs, that this would be a different result? And obviously those two questions kind of interweave a little bit based on how much Alabama pulled back. I mean, look, Alabama still didn't have their foot, fully on the throttle, on the gas. I mean, they pulled back to some extent, and it almost cost them this game. And how do you grade what you got out of Carson Beck, right? 3 interceptions, including one that ended the game. You also lost a fumble in there. But at the same time, he threw for 3 touchdowns and almost 440 yards in this game. He did not get a lot of help from his receivers early. And I think that certainly it was part of why Alabama had that 28-0 lead. I think there's quite, just directly a ball to Arian Smith early in this game, deep ball that needs to be caught. That's not necessarily on Carson Beck, but as that first half rolled through, there were a lot of people with suggestions of even benching Carson Beck. And I don't think that was ever seriously considered. But there are certainly questions about Carson Beck and whether he is good enough to lead Georgia to a national championship. And the big question that I would have, because a lot of people are already starting to suggest that this is not the only time we see these two teams match up. Do I believe that because of what we saw in Georgia's comeback, it's enough to think the result would be different? The biggest issue for me from the Georgia aspect of this, and Garrett, I said this on College Football Game Time when I was hosting with you on Saturday mornings, 92.9 The Game, 8 a.m. I think I said it on our preview show as well a couple days ago. The one thing that's not going to happen is Ryan Williams is not going to be the guy to beat me. What happened? Because the rest of the offense didn't do much, or excuse me, the rest of the receivers, a couple here or there. No one else went over 40 yards receiving. Like Ryan Williams is up there at $177. Like, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
Like, that's not the way in no world is that the way in which you play defense. And I know 75 of it gets tacked on right at the very end, and it does skew the numbers a little bit.
And then you had the pop pass, which was just sort of an unbelievable play that you can't do much.
If there's one guy that you can't have beat you, it was going to be him, and he's the guy that beat you. And so a lot of questions to be asked about the defensive game plan, a lot of questions to be asked about the unfamiliarity with the motion and movement on Alabama's offense and why Georgia was so unprepared. Look, on the back end of this, you had a really nice comeback. You actually took the lead for about 20 seconds in this game.
Not even.
And people are patting Georgia on the back for it. And I got a lot of questions for Kirby Smart. I got a lot of questions for Carson Beck. A lot more people are coming out of this with a much more positive view of the Georgia Bulldogs than I am. Going down 28-0 outweighs coming back in this one, in my opinion. And it doesn't feel like a lot of people are eye to eye with me on that. And that's fine. Everyone's entitled to feel about this however you would like to feel. I think a lot of that is built on the idea of we want optimism because we're probably going to see this team again and we want to tell ourselves that we can beat them. I would just want to know what changed in this game to allow Georgia back into it, because I think it might have more to do with Alabama than it had to do with Georgia.
I don't think you're wrong in that assessment necessarily, but look, I think something did change in the second half. I don't know what that thing was necessarily. It could have just been as simple as Georgia started converting plays. Fourth down, they stayed on the field. When they just turned into desperation mode. That's really the number one thing that I took from this game, is that Georgia was completely and totally ineffective.
I think they stopped putting Jalen Milroe in harm's way. They stopped running Jalen Milroe.
That also helped. They took their foot off the gas.
Yeah.
Alabama did. And what we've seen historically is teams who take their foot off the gas and then let somebody right back into the game.
It's tough to turn it back on.
It's tough to turn it back on.
Yeah.
And it certainly helps when you have a guy like Ryan Williams who can go up and make an unbelievable play, which he did. Full credit to him, because you have 120 plus yards that came for him on 2 plays in the second half, which led to both the touchdown and the eventual field goal. He's probably the number one reason they scored 10 points in the second half. And credit to him, credit to Alabama for making those plays. But Kalen DeBoer had an incredible game plan in the first half. You have to give him credit for that.
Yeah.
But whatever Kirby Smart was able to change, where was that in the first half? That's the biggest thing. But I point to the third down mark. Your 3 of 15 on third down, that's unacceptable. That's terrible. But you're 5 of 5 on fourth down. That saves you a little bit. It does. And all of that sort of happened in the second half. You don't convert your first third down conversion until about halfway through the third quarter. It's unacceptable. It's terrible. That's just not good enough. And if you're already playing on the road, you're already playing you're up against the 8 ball in this game. You need to put together a good performance. And Kirby Smart needs to have faster starts. You cannot start and peg 28 points up on the board, because these are the types of teams that will do that to you. If you leave the door open to your opposition in the first half, not every team is capable of taking advantage of that. We saw that with Kentucky. They were not capable of beating you on offense. You saw that with Clemson. At the time, they were not capable of beating you on offense. But when you play in Alabama, when you play at Texas, when you eventually play in Ole Miss, when you play at Tennessee, when you play in Ohio State in the college football playoff, when you play in Oregon in the college football playoff, those teams are going to be capable of beating you with offense, and they can do it right from the jump. And if you're Georgia, you can't rely on incredible, improbable second half comebacks, miracle opportunities. And if you're Carson Beck, you can't turn the ball over 4 times. I want to say they were like, negative 19 on turnovers. And that includes the turnover that they got, by the way, where you get a safety. on just a dreadful play where they send a blitz and you're not able to pick it up. It was just not good enough if you're Carson Beck. I understand you had the incredible second half comeback and pat him on the back. But look, that's a pat him on the butt and move on to next week type of performance. It's not a wow, that was very impressive. You look at the numbers you talked about him, 440 yards, 3 touchdowns. Great. 4 turnovers. You're the reason that this team lost this game as much as it is. You were the reason that they were in this game in the first place. It's just one of those types of performances. You have to take the bad with the good. I understand that. But Carson Beck has to be better in these types of situations. He's going to be on the road in very hostile environments. If that's it, they got to figure that out because he has struggled in these road environments before. He struggled against Auburn a couple of years ago, but oftentimes, I mean, he struggled up against Kentucky. I mean, we've seen this sort of thing continue to manifest itself. And in a season where you're going to be playing in these hostile environments, you just have to be better. You can't rely on your defense to bail you out. They did, but you can't hope for that every single week.
Yeah, it's really surprising to me to see how positive the reaction was to this one. You looked so bad, and the fact that you came back, you still lost this game. You still took a knock in terms of your safety valve for making the college football playoffs. I'm just really surprised how positive. I mean, I saw people, and look, we understand Twitter is what it is, and in-person discussions may be slightly different. And there are people who are like, they're not losing a game the rest of the year. Book it. Like, we're going to walk right into Austin, Texas and handle business and look like the team that we looked like in the second half. I have no basis for that. The slow starts under Kirby Smart, when you are this sort of team, as good a team as can potentially be in college football, has unfortunately become a trend. I have no reason to believe that just because you were able to come back from 28-0, that you're going to walk into Austin and handle business. I am really surprised by just how optimistic and how positive the reaction is to this one.
Well, it's resiliency, and I appreciate the resiliency. The team looked like a different team in the second half, but I'll say it again, it's because they played with desperation. A lot of those instances, they're not going to be going for it on 4th down on their own 30-yard line, and then they end up picking up that one. That's clutch. It's great. But the thing is, it's more of the same issues that you had in the first half. It's just you have a desperation type of play where you have to have you need to have a 4th down conversion, because if you don't convert here, the game's over and you give the ball right back. So it's a lot of those same issues that really were kind of muddled a little bit more in the second half and ended up working out for him. And look, they had an opportunity to win this football game. And if they had, maybe we'd be talking about this a little bit differently, but you lost. You lost. And you have 42 games in a row. And I think sometimes losses can spur teams and make them better. It remains to be seen if that's going to be the case in this one. I have some serious questions about the Georgia defense. I have serious questions about the Georgia offense, because if you want to win a national championship, which that's the expectation for this team, you are the best team in America. You're thought to be the best team in America. The best team in America goes on the road and doesn't turn the ball over 4 times, have critical penalties, fails on 3rd down, and can't get the job done, and gives up a 75-yard play on one play after you end up completing this improbable comeback to take a lead. The best team in America doesn't do that. Now, Kirby Smart, I still believe, is the best coach in America, and I think he's going to have these guys ready to go down the rest of the stretch. I think they're going to be favored in a lot of these games. Will they win them? The margin for error is very, very small. But look, Jalen Milroe, give him his flowers. I mean, the guy was, truthfully, he looked unbeatable in this game. 374 yards from him. Very efficient passer in this one. He has 2 touchdowns. He does have the interception, but it's one that bounced off a Georgia player and his own player. It's not his fault. But he's also really good with his legs. Really, really good with his legs. And you see the difference that it makes and the stress that it causes on what it does to this Georgia defense. 117 yards for him there. He had the pair of touchdowns on the ground. But look, Jalen Milroe is as good as it gets. And when it comes time to the NFL draft, we'll discuss all of that. I'm just going to discuss what he is to this Alabama offense, and it's everything. He is everything to that offense. And until Georgia figures out how they can slow down Jalen Milroe, I don't have faith in them to be able to get a win against Alabama if it comes back again. Any more thoughts on this one before we move on? I know we've got a lot to cover here.
Yeah, I just in terms of Jalen Milroe, just to back up what you just said, I think he has squarely put himself in front of, believe it or not, Travis Hunter for the Heisman right now. Not been decided, but I think with that performance, even with Georgia making it tight at the end, having the moment with Ryan Williams, he's put himself right there.
Let's keep it in the SEC, Abe. What do you say? A stunner in the Southeastern Conference. Ole Miss handed a loss, 20-17. Kentucky goes on the road. They haven't beaten such a highly ranked team on the road since 1977 when the Wildcats won at number 4 Penn State. This is about as good as it gets for Bob Stoops and company. And look, this is the second time in a row that they drag a top-ranked team through the mud. And they finished this one with the win. This is a Kentucky style of a game. This is what they want to do. This is what Stoops, this is his specialty. Dirty, ugly, physical. Muck it up. And that's what they did. And for whatever reason, Ole Miss agreed to play this style of game, and they couldn't play theirs. And Lane Kiffin, at what point do you start asking questions about this guy? At what point do you think that he's just not going to get it done? Because the expectation was that they were going to roll similar to what they did last year until they met the Georgias and the Alabamas and the Tennessees and everybody else in the conference, if and when they made a conference championship game and an eventual college football playoff. But look, you got to win these physical bouts. If you cannot win a physical battle in the SEC, you're not going to go very far. And Ole Miss, they failed their first test in the SEC.
Why are we asking these questions about James Franklin year after year after year and not Lane Kiffin? Because it's a pretty similar story, if you ask me. And I know that they have gotten maybe one here or one there, but over the course of it, it's the same consistency of Penn State. If anything, even dropping games like this one, which Penn State doesn't do. Right. I mean, yeah, you have to start to ask those questions and just to slide away from this game for a quick second. Like, if you're a Florida fan and you're going to move on from Billy Napier and Lane Kiffin's at the top of that resume, like, does a loss like this make you second guess it a little bit? No. I mean, you may as well go hire James Franklin if you want to, run up to 10-2, but lose to Georgia and Bama and Tennessee every year. It's a bad loss. And quite frankly, for a team that wanted to be in that discussion, wants to be in that tier and wants to make the college football playoffs, like, this is the worst loss of any team that we've talked about in the SEC, right? In terms of the ones that are in the playoff group. Sure. And that includes Missouri and Tennessee, Georgia, Bama, Texas, like, this is probably going to be the season long. It might be the worst loss of that group. And it's just very tough to see them getting in now without a win that maybe we don't expect. And it's, first off, congratulations again to Kentucky to go on the road and accomplish this. What an achievement for Mark Stoops. What a performance for Brock Vandagriff. And not that it necessarily was a sour taste in their mouth from the Georgia performance, but you play your butts off and aren't able to get the reward at the end. So you do feel very nice that they were able to in this one, as opposed to watching Georgia leave with a 1-point victory.
Yeah.
But yeah, just not good enough for Lane Kiffin and it for the offense, man, because I think the defense played okay. Jackson Dart, not a Heisman contender. You got to be in the 30s. You got to be in the 40s against this team. And they're good. I think we've seen that they've been good. They did a great job against Georgia. They did a good job here against Ole Miss, but you have got to be more explosive. And unfortunately, the big takeaway is not about what's going on the field. It's about what's going on the sidelines. I agree with you. Like what's up with Lane Kiffin and why can't he dial it up for these big games?
Yeah, I mean, I understand where you're coming from with to some extent. Look, Ole Miss, you say Ole Miss should have been in the 40s in this game. No, they should. No,
30s,
this
30s or 40s.
No, I mean, this is a game that they should have won. They should have been. They were the better team, and you have Trey Harris who goes buck wild in this game, and you should win this game. But can we give Kentucky a little bit more credit? I mean, this is not a bad Kentucky team. Like they struggle on offense. They have some glaring weaknesses. I tweeted about this after the game, but they have some glaring weaknesses. They do. But the defense is about as good as most of the best defenses in the country. They're really good. They've shown it time and again. They did it against South Carolina. I understand the score line. Look at the actual numbers. The numbers say that they dominated that South Carolina offense. Just you turn the ball over 5 times. That's the kind of thing that happens. They dominated Georgia. They dominated this Ole Miss team that's really solid, and the offense just did what it needed to do and stayed ahead of the chains and did little things right. I mean, they hold Ole Miss to season lows in nearly every statistical category. They allowed 353 yards in this one. They had 7 tackles for loss. They had 4 sacks, and they held the Rebels to 1 of 10 on third down. I mean, this is just Kentucky going on the road and getting a win. I understand where you're coming from with the expectation that the Ole Miss team should be better because that's a team that hangs its hat on prominent offense. I don't think Georgia's necessarily in that same category where it turns that's where they hang their hat necessarily. They're really good offense or they're expected to be. But look, just give Kentucky their flowers here. This isn't Mississippi State. This isn't Vanderbilt. This isn't one of the bottom feeders. They're a team that struggled at times this season, but they're not a bad football team.
No, but I mean, I think you're misconstruing the South Carolina game a little bit. That's just my opinion.
They got beat. Yeah,
they got beat 31-6.
They got beat because their offense couldn't get going. It wasn't because of their defense. It had nothing to do with their defense.
Their defense was fine. It wasn't. I mean, I don't know. I just think you're overstating it. I mean, they got beat 31-6 at home. Like they turned the ball over twice. They had 1 takeaway. Like I don't know. Like I can't ignore that when talking about a 1-point loss to Georgia and now this win against Ole Miss. I think they're ultimately going to be a team that and not in terms of style of play, but reminds me of Georgia Tech last year. They're just a pest. They're annoying to play with. Their style is evident and frustrating to deal with. And they can jump out and bite you. And that's what they did to Ole Miss. They're not an easy win. I think that's what it's really going to boil down to is anytime you're playing Kentucky, you're going to have to bring it in some manner because they are not going to hand this win to you. And I think Ole Miss learned that the hard way. I'm guessing probably weren't mentally where they needed to be. If we're going to be just straight up honest about Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss, probably not in the right mental space. They got games coming up with LSU, Oklahoma, Georgia, all in the month of October, and I guess Georgia's later in November. But
still,
it probably a little bit of that Marcus Freeman Notre Dame situation where they believe their own hype, and that's what happened with Notre Dame, and probably a very similar mindset cost Ole Miss.
Yeah, and look, don't be surprised if this Kentucky team goes on a little bit of a run here. They're clearly not one of the top teams in the conference. I think they're clearly a rung below that, but they're
in that third tier. They're in that third tier that's like LSU and Texas A&M and Arkansas. They're probably not where Ole Miss, and I know they just beat Ole Miss, so it's a dumb thing to say, but they're probably not where like Ole Miss and Missouri is. They're certainly not in the top tier, but they're right there.
Yeah, I mean if they played 10 times, right? So you get Vanderbilt. You get Vanderbilt, you get Florida, then it's Auburn for Kentucky. And look, you can go on a little bit of a run, string together some wins and see what you can do. But then you get Tennessee, finish the season with Tennessee, Texas, and Louisville. Doesn't get any easier when the season finishes up. So this is a big win for Mark Stoops and full credit to Kentucky, the Wildcats, and all of them for this win. Very, very big for them. But it was almost very big for Virginia Tech. They come up just a little bit short against Miami in a Friday night thriller of a game where Miami has to come storming back. Virginia Tech leaves the door open, and they almost kick it in themselves. Buzzer beater of a play where I don't think that there was enough to overturn it. Whatever the call on the field, I think should have stood. I know you have some strong feelings about this, so I'm going to give the floor to you, man.
Well, first off, you got to feel for Virginia Tech. It's been a tough season for them. Obviously, did not get off to the start that they wanted to, and the expectations were missed very badly. And they had an opportunity to kind of turn things around a little bit. They had an opportunity for a big win, and unable to get that, unfortunately. But yeah, look, we've got to get back to the idea of clear and convincing. And just you've got, if it takes more than like 35 seconds to look at a replay, you know you don't know what actually happened. And when you got a mass of humanity, 7 people deep in the back of the end zone, and it was called a catch on the field, and you got nothing that shows it not being a catch, and you just kind of willy-nilly overturn it. Whatever words they use in the NFL or in college, irrefutable evidence or clear and concise, whatever words you want to use or describe, there's no way they had it. And it's really frustrating to see the fight Virginia Tech had in this game to not have it go their way. And it would have been a lot easier to take if it had been called incomplete in the moment. Now you've got them celebrating, thinking they won. You certainly don't have enough evidence to actually overturn it, but you do anyways. And certainly there's a huge benefit to Miami to get it overturned. Cam Ward's still alive for the Heisman. The ACC in general is still alive for 2 playoff berths. There's a very big benefit to this having been overturned. You asked some questions about that in general, but you got to do better. Like, if you're the officiating crew, if you're the replay booth, like, stick to the rules, man. Like I don't care if the official got on the headset with the replay and said, "Guys, I think I screwed this up live. Can you help me out?" Like, that's not how it happens. Like, you have to have clear evidence that what was called on the field was incorrect. You didn't have that. This needed to be a play that stood, and it needed to be a Virginia Tech victory, and it's incredibly disappointing for Hokies fans that it wasn't.
Yeah, but ultimately Virginia Tech left the door open. You get outscored in the fourth quarter. You get outscored 21-10 in the second half, and you lose this game. I mean, it's as much Virginia Tech leaving the door open as it is anything. Just, you cannot afford to let it come down to officiating. That's what it comes down to, honestly. And I want to give some flowers out here too as well. I mean, Cam Ward, how special is this guy? I mean, the guy overcomes the 2 interceptions that he throws in the first half. He comes around and ends this game with 4 tutties and 343 yards. And how about Restrepo too? Restrepo is about as clutch as can be, the wide receiver here. I mean, these guys, they have some dudes on this team, and it looks like they're finally putting it all of it together, because this was the type of game that in the past Mario Cristobal drops. Mario Cristobal finds a way to lose games like this. It didn't happen this time. He's been ineffective at these, but not on Friday. And ultimately, it's a win in that category. That's the biggest thing. And Cam Ward had a couple of Heisman moments. He had a couple of clips that for a fact are going to be on that reel when he is in New York City later on this season. And if you're Miami, you just got to keep checking that win box, and you got to keep cooking through the schedule, because you cannot afford any hiccups. Because the ACC needs you to be as strong as possible, and it needs Clemson to continue being as strong as possible, because the rest of the conference has stumbled in almost all of their opportunities on the biggest stages. I know there's Miami, who had that big win against Florida, which, take that for what you will, but you have NC State playing Tennessee, they get drubbed. You have Clemson playing Georgia, they get drubbed. You have Louisville, who goes on the road to Notre Dame in a game that we'll talk about here in just a moment. They get drubbed. It looks a little bit closer than the final score might indicate, but they got beat in this game. They have lost every major game that they've played this season for the most part. They don't look like a team or conference that's going to get 2 teams in, unless Clemson continues to do what it's doing right now and just dropping bombs on people, scoring 40-plus points per game, and Miami keeps winning. Then you might have an argument to get those 2 teams in. They'll play each other. They'll play each other later on this season, likely in the ACC championship game, but they need Miami to keep winning. They need Clemson to keep winning and winning big.
Yeah, that's their path. That's their path to getting 2 teams into the college football playoffs. And Miami goes undefeated. and then loses to Clemson in the ACC title game. They'll get 2 teams in, and that's what this game kept alive, in my opinion.
Yeah, but how about the Big 12? Well, it's weird. I almost said Pac-12 when I saw these 2 teams and I was writing this out. But uh, look, Arizona smacked Utah, and it was a game where Utah had every opportunity to be in this game. They had every opportunity, and the Utes missed Cam Rising. Not maybe on the stat sheet because freshman Isaac he played well, all things considered, moved the ball, but they couldn't convert in the red zone. The Wildcats stopped the Utes 4 times on 4th down, and he has the 2 interceptions. Just you got to be clutch. You got to come up when you got to score touchdowns in the red zone, and you look at what they were able to do between the 20s. They had their most explosive first half of the season. They had 219 yards in the first half, but they scored 3 points. That's not good. That's unacceptable. You can't do that. The rushing attack didn't do much else. I mean, you have 84 net yards on the ground. And maybe Cam Rising is the difference. I mean, like maybe he is the reason that they dropped this game. He's a 7th-year senior. He's played 4 total quarters this season after missing all of last season. At what point is it time to move on? At what point is it time to just say, sayonara, time to move on to next year, just not with Cam Rising? It's just, I have all these expectations for Utah and what Utah can be because the blueprint is there for Utah to be a really good football team. But the fact that you rely so heavily on Cam Rising is just not good. It's not good for your program, and it's not good for you moving forward. But I will say this. I don't want to come off too dour necessarily, but Utah, you got a guy in Isaac Wilson. He looked good for a freshman, making a start in a big spot against a pretty solid Arizona team. But you just got to be better in the red zone. You got to score touchdowns.
Yeah, I mean, to answer your question, when do you cut bait with Cam Rising? When do you just move on? When your backup's better than he is, and Isaac Wilson's not, and that costs you a game.
Okay, no. I mean, emotionally, they have to.
Never. He's the guy that you need him to win games. You don't lose this game with Cam Rising at quarterback if he's healthy. That's the end of the story. I mean, if you had someone that you had recruited that was better than him, you would have moved on emotionally and literally, but you don't. And now it's cost you what is, potentially the Big 12 title. I mean, we'll see where they, obviously there's a lot of season, a lot of conference games left to play. But this is a loss at home.
Driver's seat to the title. You still control your entire destiny for the most part.
To an extent, yeah. But I mean, you got to deal now with the rest of your schedule, and this was a home loss, and so you're going to have to go, on the road. UCF at the end of the year is tough. The big one for this, though, and because I don't know if we're going to get into it necessarily later, is we got to keep an eye on what BYU is doing as well, because Arizona and BYU are meeting up a couple weeks from now, and that could be where a loser leave town match in terms of the Big 12 standings. And we talked about this a couple weeks ago. Remember, Arizona, they did lose to Kansas State, but it wasn't technically a Big 12 game. So their standings are still undefeated. Colorado in the Big 12, still undefeated. Iowa State, Texas Tech, West Virginia, even in the Big 12, still undefeated. So Utah's got a lot of teams that they need to hope for some results from. And they'll obviously be able to hand some of those results directly on their own. But this was surprising. It was late night, and it was kind of just as you're wrapping up the evening. We're all trying to unwind from the finish of that Georgia game against Alabama and what we witnessed. And, I just wanted a nice, easy ranked team handles business so I could go to bed. And it was like, I think I have to stay up and watch another top 10 team lose. Like, that's kind of where we're
after
at.
Dark. It never dies.
That's where we are right now. But very disappointing for Utah at home. I think you win this game with Cam Rising. And that's what's the most frustrating part about it is I don't know how close he was to going. I know he was not close a week ago. I don't know if he was any closer in this one.
They keep calling him a game time decision.
I have no idea, but I'm not surprised.
Kyle Whittingham says, I don't really buy it.
I'm not surprised that not having Cam Rising finally caught up with them. It caught up with him almost immediately last year. They survived last week, but it caught up with them, and that's frustrating because I do think this team can be better than what they showed Saturday night.
Yeah, but ultimately, all you got to do is win the games in front of you for the rest of the way, and you'll be in. You're in. I mean, that's just how it effectively what it's going to be. But you did mention BYU. You didn't mention Texas Tech. You didn't mention Iowa State. And you didn't mention Colorado. Those are programs who are
I did.
undefeated. West Virginia is another one. I mean, these guys are undefeated in the Big 12 right now. It is not a deep conference, but it is definitely wide. And you look up and down this group of teams, and Colorado did something the other day. What they did to Central Florida is
It was
truly a
surprising.
sight to behold.
It
I
was
was
surprising.
shocked.
Came out of
I was
nowhere.
shocked. It was a
Yeah.
game that I fully expected Colorado to go in there and just get beat over the head with the rushing attack, and they didn't. It didn't happen. It didn't happen. They actually the inverse happened, and Colorado looked like a really strong football team, and that wasn't a UCF team necessarily that I felt like was going to go and contend for a Big 12 championship, just like I didn't feel like Baylor was a team that was going to go contend for a Big 12 championship, or Nebraska was a team that was going to go contend for a Big 10 championship. But you win the games in front of you and you do what you got to do to get to where you need to be. And Colorado, to this point, outside of the one blip against Nebraska, they're 4-1. This is a 4-1 team. And if they go out and put on performances like they did against Central Florida in a game where you have very clear mismatches where they had very serious advantages over you, then they could be a difference maker in this conference. And you mentioned BYU. BYU might be the best team in this conference right now. They look like it on the field. Kansas State, you could say they're the best team in this conference right now because Kansas State, what they just did, it was fantastic. We'll talk about that again on this podcast. But my point being, and I want to bring this back in and tie a bow on this Utah game. Utah cannot afford. They cannot afford to drop any more games. And if it comes down to the health of Cam Rising, then you have some serious problems with your team. That's all I'm trying to say when I was like, they need to move on from Cam Rising. I'm not saying that they need to, pull his scholarship and move on and whatever. That's not what I'm trying to say. I'm not saying they need to bench him or anything like that. No, not at all. I'm saying that the dependency on Cam Rising has to change because if you're in these situations where you're not going to win without this one guy on your team, I don't buy you as a legitimate contender.
That's almost every team in the. That's almost every team in the country, though. Like when it comes to the quarterback position, like it doesn't make sense to say that. Like Georgia's relying on Carson Beck the same way Alabama relies on Jalen Milroe. The same. I mean, it's just like I know what you're trying to say,
okay.
And it'd be nice to build a more well-rounded team that can kind of take this hit. I understand what you're saying.
It just seems to be the consistent theme is what I'm saying.
They just haven't built that, unfortunately. And quite frankly, and it's talented, I guess, as Isaiah Wilson is, like, he's just not good enough. Like the guy last year wasn't good enough either. And so you're just kind of stuck waiting for Rising to return and seeing if he can pick things back up. I don't know why their backups aren't better, but they're not.
Yeah. But Noah Fifita, I mean, he shined in this game. He had some big plays. He really did what he needed to do. And I mean, it's not a sexy stat line, but he made the big plays. He popped down the field. And this Utah defense is still pretty stout. It's got a tough pass rush. So it's really a great performance here from Noah Fifita. But how about these running backs? Two guys who pop over 70 yards. They had 95 yards on their first 7 carries. And they had a stellar defensive performance of their own, and I want to give them credit. 8 pass breakups, 7 tackles for loss, 2 interceptions. I mean, they played really well. They deserve to win this game, and they did. Let's move into another game in the Big Ten because it was I don't know if was it convincing to you? It was a strong performance from Penn State. They win this game 21-7. Luke Altmaier, I mean, it was the exact type of formula for a strong Penn State win. An Illinois team that was trying its damnedest not to make any mistakes, and eventually it does. He has the interception. And Luke Altmaier, just not super sexy. They stay ahead of the chains and they play solid defense and hope for some turnovers to bounce their way. And ultimately, it's just not enough. They're not able to go on the road. I thought Illinois looked good. I thought Illinois proved that it belongs in the top 25 in consideration of a solid football team. They're not a playoff contender necessarily in my eyes, but they're a very good football team. and give them credit for that. But Penn State, I wanted to see them win this game convincingly. And 21-7, sure, it's fine, but it was 14-7 till late. It was 7-7 at halftime. It wasn't convincing enough for me. Drew Aller was not explosive enough for me. Katrin Allen, I mean, he had a really good game. He goes for 100 yards. Nick Singleton, I mean, that's your identity. You want to run the ball, play good defense, but this type of performance is not going to translate against an Ohio State and against an Oregon and against the other Big Ten contenders, like the top level teams across the playoff world. It's not going to translate. And I need to see more from Penn State. I wanted to see Penn State win convincingly. They win by 14, and it's 2 scores, and that's great. They also do it at home against a non-explosive offense. They weren't explosive themselves, and I wanted to see a little bit more from the Nittany Lions.
Yeah, I agree with you on a lot of things. It was 14-7. They scored with 1:55 left. That kind of separated it, but it was a tight ball game most of this way through. Illinois kind of feels like the Big Ten version of Kentucky a little bit. They're going to be a pest. They play good defense. I just don't know if they have the offense, even with Altmaier, to keep up with the upper echelon there in the conference. But yeah, I agree with you. Like we were both kind of the same mindset. Like we really want to see Penn State here at home put on a real performance that makes me kind of believe that maybe they could beat Oregon or maybe they could beat Ohio State. It's nice for them to get a win, but I didn't get that either. And I would have some concerns with some of those games coming up.
Yeah, and I do also want to mention Luke Altmaier does have the 2 fumbles as well. I mean, ultimately, you have an identity and you know who you are as a football team. Both of these teams do. I just don't think that expectations around Illinois. This is a good performance for Illinois. And look, give them credit. Give them credit for that. Nobody expected Illinois to be at this point in this season right now. Everybody expected Penn State to be here, and everybody expected a little bit more from Penn State. And I don't think that necessarily the Nittany Lions are going to be super tested down the stretch until they play. Here, so it's UCLA next, and then it's a road trip out to USC to LA, and then it's Wisconsin. Oh, it's a bye week, then it's Wisconsin, then it's Ohio State. October into November is going to be tough. You're going to have that performance against USC. That's a team that you need to be at least a little bit explosive. They're going to test you a little bit on defense. I don't think that they have been tested yet this year. I just don't. I think West Virginia is a fine team. I think Illinois is a fine team. You can really get pushed against Bowling Green. I just don't buy him yet. And after the last couple of seasons, I need to be convinced that Penn State belongs before I really put them into that category of legitimate contender, even in the Big Ten Conference, because I think that road trip out to USC is going to be very telling for them. But let's move into another game. Did you have any more thoughts on this one?
No, you're good.
All right, let's go into another game that happened up there in that region of the country. Notre Dame with a strong punctuating win over Louisville. Louisville scores 10 points in the fourth quarter to make this look a little bit closer here. But 31-24, I thought Notre Dame did what it was supposed to do. Riley Leonard was consistent, 163 yards for him, 2 touchdowns there, 120 yards on the ground. But Riley Leonard, he does it with his legs. Louisville shows that they have that strong rush defense. They do. Notre Dame actually finding a little bit of creases. I think they might have learned a little something from what Georgia Tech was able to do. It's just the biggest thing is you don't have a blocked kick return for a touchdown. You don't have a backwards pass picked up in the end zone. That's the difference in that Georgia Tech game for Louisville. Notre Dame isn't going to beat themselves in the same way, and they showed it on the scoreboard. You bounce out to a 21-7 lead, and you don't look back. Tyler Shugg is a strong player. He's electric. He can throw the ball. That he can chuck it. But they put the clamps on them for the most part. Ja'Cory Brooks was strong again, but outside of that, you look pretty good, Notre Dame. Kudos. You needed a win like this. You're back on track.
Yeah, and we talked about it with Clemson and Miami. This one hurts the ACC quite a bit. It would have been nice to have a third team in the running there, and it appears like that third team probably would have been Louisville. Notre Dame just it was comfortable though, and I know Louisville got it to within a possession a couple of times in the fourth quarter, but it still felt like Notre Dame had control of this game. Very efficient game plan from Riley Leonard. Did lead the team in rushing once again, 52 yards, but only 6 incompletions on the night, 2 touchdowns thrown. Just a smart balanced, calm offensive game plan for Notre Dame. They let their defense do the work. It just Ja'Cory Brooks is really good for Louisville, and they had to deal with that. He had 2 touchdowns, but outside of him, not much to write home about for Louisville. And Notre Dame seems to started to figure itself out after the issues with Northern Illinois.
Yeah, I mean, look, Louisville. You spotted the team a 21-7 lead in the span of like 5.5 minutes or something like that. It was early in the game that this happened, and it was a good answer from Louisville. It's just not enough for them. And I mean, you can't turn the ball over 3 times in the first half and expect to win. Same thing with Georgia. Turn the ball over too much on the road, and that's the kind of thing that happens. But let's move into another game that happened out there outside of the SEC, in the Big 12. Oklahoma State got obliterated by Kansas State. I know we both liked Kansas State in this game. I think we both thought that Kansas State had a pretty clear and obvious advantage in this one, but I didn't expect them to get beat quite this bad. I didn't think it was going to be quite this ugly. Everything was working for Kansas State. Everything did. It starts with that rushing attack. It starts right there. 3 Bills on the ground. DJ Giddens gashing them. He had the 66-yard run in this game. He has the touchdown, 187 yards. Avery Johnson gashed them. 60 yards on the ground for him. 259 yards through the air. He has the 3 touchdowns. I mean, Ollie Gordon still not really able to get going. Alan Bowman has turnovers again. It's still a story as old as time. Oklahoma State relying too heavily on Alan Bowman to get it done, and he doesn't get it done. Ollie Gordon still nowhere really to be found. Kansas State does what they do best. They pound the rock, and then they win the game.
You can't throw the ball 50 times with that guy. Like, what are we doing here? I totally agree with you. Ollie Gordon, I guess it's the best game of the season for him. He gets up over 75 yards, but doesn't get in the end zone and still just doesn't look electric, exciting, dangerous. It's certainly not when you're comparing him to DJ Giddens, who felt like every time he touched the ball, he was 20, 30 yards downfield, racing guy, dude, stiff arming him and juking. I mean, he had everything working on that one. And then Avery Johnson, the quarterback for Kansas State, combines for 5 touchdowns between rushing and passing. It's just, you have to ask what happened against BYU. Kansas State just got popped in the mouth so quick. They never really got back into that game a week ago. This is the team that looks like we thought they would, that looks like they're, if not the best, among the best teams in the Big 12. And you just, at least for me, a little bit in the back of my mind, I would like to see Kansas State get back to the Big 12 title game and maybe get another shot at BYU. They just look like the best team, especially if Utah's not going to have Cam Rising.
Yeah, it was just that 5-minute run against BYU where things just went off the rails, and that's just what happens in college football. But this game, I mean, it was a tight contest. It was 21-13 or something at halftime, and then on the second play from scrimmage for Kansas State, they go off 66 yards for Giddens, and it just sort of felt over at that point. You outscored 21-7 in the second half, and you mentioned Ollie Gordon kind of was able to get going. Yeah, in the first half, I was watching this game unfold, and I saw Ollie Gordon had something like 70-plus rushing yards in the first half, and I'm like, here it is. We're back. Ollie Gordon is getting back in gear. What's he going to do in this second half? This is fantastic. Oh, okay. Finishes with 4 yards in the second half. It's just unacceptable. I mean, it's one of those things. You have a very clear identity. For whatever reason, they've gone away from that identity, and you just put the ball in Alan Bowman's hands and expect. What's the definition of insanity, Abe? What is it again?
Doing the same thing over and over and expecting the same results.
Got it.
Like that.
Got it. Somebody might need to go let Mike Gundy know. Maybe Alan Bowman shouldn't be throwing the ball 50 times, and maybe you should be giving the ball to a guy who everybody thought would be a potential Heisman Trophy candidate, unless something's wrong with him, which is something that you've pontificated here as of late.
I mean, even if this was his best half of the season, like, he still didn't look dangerous. He didn't he didn't look like a threat to take it to the house every time he touched the ball. And that's not how we would have felt about him the past, last year. So I don't have an answer, but it's just not the same Ollie Gordon for whatever reason.
Yeah. And one last thing on this game before we move on. We have one more game to talk about before we get into our shutouts. But Kansas State, one thing that they do still need to work on, they dominate this game on offense. You have almost 600 yards total. But on defense, you still have a big issue. It's big plays. It was something that came back and bit you against BYU. It's something that might bite you down the stretch. And especially if you want to go play and win a Big 12 championship and eventually play in a college football playoff, the big plays in the passing game. They allowed 5 different Oklahoma State players to gain at least 10 yards on a reception and then gave up 364 yards to the air. Now, a lot of that has to do with the fact that you have Alan Bowman dropping back and throwing the ball 50 times. But 364 yards to the air, you got to be a little bit better down the stretch against teams that are a little bit more potent in that regard. But let's move into one where 2 quarterbacks, they would hopefully not be throwing the ball 50 times a game. It's Michael Hawkins and Peyton Thorne of Oklahoma and Auburn. Peyton Thorne does look a lot better in this game. I will give him credit there. He completes, he doesn't have 50 attempts here. He has 32, 338, 3 touchdowns, but it's another interception. It's another backbreaker of a turnover. Michael Hawkins does a lot better as the game goes on. He has the strong opening possession, and then they sort of went to sleep for the next, 2.5 quarters of action. You score only 3 points. You're down 14-10 in a game that you look not ready for. And you have the opening drive. It's a scripted drive. It's great. But then after that, I didn't see a whole heck of a lot from this Oklahoma offense. They looked like they were out of place. They were a fish out of water at Jordan-Hare Stadium. And it was not until Auburn just handed the ball right back to Oklahoma that they were able to take advantage. And credit to Oklahoma for going and getting its first road SEC win, first win as an SEC team.
Well, a couple of things here, Garrett. I think Oklahoma and Michael Hawkins specifically surprised Auburn a little bit with this speed. They made the adjustment after that first touchdown run to be like, and this is where what you're talking about came into play, where the offense just stalled and punt after punt after punt. What do they have? Like 7, 8 straight punts before they finally got a field goal at some point.
Exactly.
Forced Michael Hawkins to beat you with his arm, and he didn't. That's what happened. Is he got you with the legs? You told yourself it wasn't going to happen again, and for the most part, it didn't. And I got to give credit to you on this one because you and I were watching this game together, and it came to a moment where Oklahoma had pulled to within 3. Pulled to within 5, 21-16. They were trying to get to within 3, but the 2-point conversion failed. And like the first thing you said after the kickoff was like, how long until Peyton Thorne throws an interception? And that's exactly what happened. And, we're on air, so you didn't see it. And I see it happening, and I see this guy running down the sidelines, and I'm trying to get you to look at the TV. I'm like, dude, you need to pat yourself.
We're in the middle of a segment.
We were, but you needed to know you had an outstanding call. You should have been able to pat yourself on the back for it. You were all over it, and you said that Auburn handed this game to Oklahoma. That's what they should have done, is hand this game. But instead, they let Peyton Thorne drop back and throw the ball. They threw this game to Oklahoma. If they had just handed off a bunch, who knows if Oklahoma's able to mount the comeback. But look, Peyton Thorne had played relatively well in this game, which was what the most surprising aspect of it was, right? He goes for 338 and 3 touchdowns. But that guy is always going to be that guy, unfortunately. And so you wipe away 330, you wipe away 3 touchdowns because you throw a game-changing interception that ends up being a pick 6 for Oklahoma, a team that had struggled most of the afternoon. And it's unfortunate because he was playing really well in the first half. Was Peyton Thorne. Looked like a totally different quarterback, but unfortunately, that's all down. You're not going to remember from that. You're going to remember him with disdain if you're an Auburn fan for throwing a pick 6 that cost you this home game against Oklahoma. Great fight by the Sooners. Their defense got it together and put the clamps on Auburn when they needed to. I mean, what was this? This was what, 21-10 there. And then you get it to 21-16, 21-24, and then finally 21-27. So you put the clamps on them. You got 3 scoring drives of your own. I guess not on all on offense because one of them was a pick six, but Oklahoma defense rallied to put themselves in position to find a win. And they did. And you just feel bad for Peyton Thorne because he had played pretty well up until that point.
Yeah, I mean, you take a look at the box score and you just remove the score and you see that Auburn outgains them by 200 yards. You tell me that before the game, and I say, oh, damn, look at Auburn, big home win. They're back on track. Oh, man. Oh, wait. I mean, it's not a good performance here. And Hugh Freeze, if Hugh Freeze wants to unlock the potential at Auburn, he needs to find a quarterback. I don't know where that guy's coming from because I don't think he's on the roster right now, and that's not good. Hugh Freeze is a damn good coach. I know that he's going to get this offense clicking. You just got to find somebody to throw the ball and be a little bit more consistent. I did like that he took ownership a little bit more after the game. He didn't just completely and totally throw Peyton Thorne under the bus like he had in the past. He had done that to his quarterbacks. He'd been under fire a bit for that here as of late. But he just tells him, he's like, I have to be clear about what to do in that situation. You can tell he's frustrated. And the other thing for Auburn, too, that was the easy part of their schedule. And as of right now, they are winless at home. They are 2-3. They have had 3 Power 4 opponents come into their place, and they've lost all 3 of those games. That's not good. That's not good. Because now you start this difficult stretch of your schedule. Now you have a wounded animal Georgia team coming into your place. And if you think Peyton Thorne struggled against an Oklahoma defense, then you got another thing coming with a road trip to Athens. Then it's Missouri, a road trip to Missouri. Then you got a Kentucky team that is just a holy house of terror. That what they just did to Jackson Dart, what they did to Carson Beck. You have a very difficult slate in front of you. There's a very real chance that you lose 5 games in a row. And then it's Vanderbilt, a team that's going to be punching and fighting and clawing for a chance to go play in a bowl game this year, a team that's already jumped on a Power 4 opponent at Virginia Tech this year. You hand them the game with some interceptions, they are going to be able to beat you in that game. I don't expect that to be the case, but you finish it with Texas A&M and then you finish it with Alabama. We're looking at an Auburn team that may not go to a bowl game. Very realistically. And for Hugh Freeze in year 2, that's not great. I think there are glimmers, and I don't think that that's how the season's going to go and unfold. I think they're going to be a team. I said at the beginning of the year, they're going to be kind of like that Kentucky type of squad where they're going to be a wrench in the gears type of team. They're not going to go win an SEC championship, but they might be the reason that somebody else doesn't, and I just haven't seen enough in those clutch moments. Like Brent Venables said after the game, he said, we didn't play well today, but we played well when we needed to. Auburn played well on Saturday, but they did not play well when they needed to. That's what separates good teams from great teams. It's really, ultimately, that's what it comes down to. And Auburn is not going to be a great team until they get a great guy under center. That's just the Hugh Freeze model. He needs a great quarterback. And most teams, like we talked about with Utah, most teams need a great quarterback if they want to go win at a high level. Auburn's got a strong defense. They've got a solid rushing attack, and you got some wide receivers finally, but you just don't have somebody under center who can get it done. Any more thoughts on this one before we move forward?
Nope.
All right, man, because it is time for our Week 5 shout-outs. Abe, I'll let you go first since I'm talking too much.
Yeah, I want to go with a trio of performances, both team and individual. Duke comes back from down 20 against rival UNC in this one, and Star Thomas, the Duke running back, $166 on the ground, a touchdown. He had 45 more in the air and a touchdown. 21 unanswered there in the second half. Duke gets a win. UNLV was in the news for the wrong reasons all week long here, Garrett. Yeah. But without a quarterback, or the guy who had been quarterback, and without a guy who had been their starting running back, they drop a 59 burger on Fresno State, far and away the highest offensive output that they have had this year. Quarterback Malik Williams, Haj Malik Williams, 13 of 16 with 3 touchdowns, also added 120 yards on the ground and a touchdown.
Yeah.
And like, I don't know, like he's not going to win the Heisman, right? But like 4 more touchdowns on the ground for Ashton Genty, 259 yards.
Damn.
It's just, you know, their video game numbers, their comic book numbers. It's just, when you know that's what you have to stop and prevent, and like you look at some of the highlights from that game last night, like he was unable to be tackled. I mean, the yards after contact for this guy is
special.
Is got to be up there with some of the single game records. That's how good he was. So just those UNLV as a team. Responding to kind of that news cycle. Duke coming back on that one, and then Ashton Genty, man, you just love watching that guy.
Dude, that game, I want to comment really on some of those too. So Mac Brown, at what point is it time?
Well, it was at the end of the year. Close. Like, you're not going to bail in season. They're not going to fire him.
You're not going to see
this is his last year. Yeah, this is it.
He needs to be done.
Yeah, this is it. And I don't know if there's a plan, if there's someone on staff that they'd kind of coach in waiting type thing, but like, yeah,
you wouldn't hire Jeff Collins?
Well, go for it. Good luck. Yeah, this is it.
They have Waffle Houses up in.
Yeah, sure. No, I agree with you. This is it. But like, it felt like they were on the path, right? Like massive disaster a week ago. You go through this whole emotional thing, and then you get off to a great start, and you're like, oh man, they look at Mac Brown and the boys rally, and then it all falls apart. You're like, oh man, this might be worse than last week's loss.
Bad teams find new and creative ways to lose, but I do want to tag on one little bit too with Ashton Genty, because oh boy, that man is fun to watch. I knew that he was a cheat code coming into the season, because I just had an idea about him, and he has been so much fun to watch. I because it's one of those things. If you play just pickup game, you're like, oh, you're not allowed to play as like a big team in college football 25, the video game. You're not allowed to play as like a really this team or that team. Like, you can't play as Alabama or Georgia. I'm like, all right, I'll go be Boise State. And I always play as Boise State or Oklahoma State or whatever, but Boise State specifically. And you just play with Ashton Genty, and you just roll. You just roll. You turn around and do that power eye and then just let it go. But look, what he's done on the field, you said there were video game numbers, and that's just what popped into my head. But I mean, credit to Boise State too. They actually did go on and get a win. This is their first time they played as a ranked team in 4 years. And a lot of that has to do with Ashton Genty, but they do it on the field. And this is a streaking Washington State squad that had been quietly a really good football team, a solid, sound team, very fun under center too. But he goes off, like you said, he's averaging 195 yards per game, and he has 845 yards this year on just 82 carries. He's got 13 tutties. It's his 4th 200-yard game, which ties the Boise State school record. He's the guy that not enough people are talking about. And I know he's a very popular name as of right now, but even then, not enough people are talking about him. I know I flipped this game on late last night, and it was fun to watch. Just John Mateer on the other side. Just a fun football game.
Yeah, the Genty thing is just selfishly, I hope he gets an invite to New York.
I don't see why he wouldn't be one of the front runners to win the Heisman Trophy.
Well, he's not going to.
Why not?
Because he's not going to pass Travis Hunter and Jalen Milroe if they keep doing things.
Abe Gordon, if he goes for 200 yards per game for the rest of the season, he's going to pass them.
I don't think so. Like, I get what you're saying. I would love to see it. I don't think so. Like, I don't think Jalen Milroe, and I know the odds flipped. Like, you can go ahead and hand it to Travis Hunter.
You run for 2,400 yards and finish off with like,
dude, I know what you're saying. You're not,
touchdowns.
I get what you're saying. You're not going to sell me on it though. I just don't think people are going to take it seriously enough. Like, what? I don't think they're going to look at what he's doing like respectfully enough. It's not you. It's not me.
I think people need to reevaluate their expectations for programs. if that were to be the case. But no, he's if he keeps playing at this level, he's at the very least is going to get an invite to
I would like
New
to
York.
see that. Yeah.
At the
I don't,
very least. It's going to be hard. It's going to be hard to beat out a guy like Jalen Milroe or Travis Hunter just because they get the eyeballs.
I don't know if Jalen Milroe can beat out Travis Hunter, if we're going to be honest. Like,
I think Travis Hunter is the best pure football player.
I think we're getting back to like this weird argument of like, screw the best quarterback on the best team. Like, let's give it to the, like, I think Travis Hunter's like perfectly positioned to be like very obviously the best player in college football.
Yes.
And I think he's going to get the Heisman because of it, no matter what Jalen Milroe does. That's if he stays healthy. I know he lost, all that stuff, but
we'll see. We'll see what ends up happening with that. We got a long way to go. Lots of college
that's right. Yeah.
Before now and then. I mean, we can't really crown anybody because of what they did in September. If we did that, Tennessee would have had multiple national championships over the last couple of years. But one other team that is looking pretty good at the end of September, Iowa State, very quietly undefeated, fresh off their first conference win in a sleepy win over Houston. Not a lot of drama, not a lot of fireworks, just doing what you got to do. A team that I had as a big wrench in the gears type of team in the Big 12 conference. I know we talked a little bit about how wide the conference is, but not how deep it is. Iowa State, very quietly, doing what they need to do and staying ahead of things. But those are our shout outs here on the College Football Overtime Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. If this is your first time, we'll see you on next week or later on this week because we do this twice a week. So you might as well set a reminder on your phone or just like and subscribe, and you'll get a notification and make sure you follow along all season long. At GChapATL on Twitter for me, at Abe Gordon on Twitter for him. It's been a lot of fun. We talked a lot of college football. You can check this out on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast, and make sure you tune in every single time we talk college football because that's what we do here on the College Football Overtime Podcast. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Garrett Chapman. His name is Abe Gordon. We will see you again here very soon.